My son's teacher called him a liar for saying his dad works at NASA. What happened at Parents' Night shocked her. Hey Reddit, my son, Jake, is a bright, curious 10-year-old who loves science, space, and everything related to NASA. Ever since he was little, he's been obsessed with rockets, astronauts, and the mysteries of the universe. It's no surprise, considering where I work. I'm an aerospace engineer at NASA. While I don't work on the front lines of space exploration, I'm heavily involved in mission planning, satellite technology, and propulsion systems. Jake has always been proud of that, and he loves talking about it at school. But a few weeks ago, he came home upset. When I asked him what was wrong, he hesitated at first. But then he finally said, "My teacher called me a liar." That got my attention immediately. He explained that during a class discussion about space, he proudly mentioned that his dad worked at NASA. Apparently, his teacher, Ms. Richards, laughed and said, "Jake, lying isn't a good habit. Be honest with your classmates." He insisted that he was telling the truth, but she doubled down, saying it was unlikely and that he shouldn't make up stories. Some of the kids laughed at him, and the humiliation stuck with him the whole day. Hearing that made my blood boil. Not only did she embarrass my son in front of his peers, but she also dismissed his excitement for something he was genuinely proud of. I could tell it crushed him. He even asked me, "Dad, do you really work at NASA, right?" That broke me. The fact that my own son was questioning reality because of a teacher's ignorance was unacceptable. I reassured him that he wasn't wrong, and I promised I would handle it. Now, I could have marched down to the school the next morning, demanded a meeting, and confronted her directly. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure she never dismissed a student like that again. It just so happened that Parents' Night was coming up in a week. A perfect opportunity to set the record straight in a way she wouldn't forget. When the day arrived, I dressed professionally but casually. I didn't want to come off as intimidating, just someone who knew what he was talking about. Jake was nervous, but I told him to trust me. When we arrived at his classroom, parents were mingling, chatting with the teacher, and admiring their kids' projects. I waited until the room was full before I made my move. Ms. Richards was speaking with a group of parents when I approached with a polite smile. She turned to greet me, completely unaware of who I was. "Good evening. Welcome to Parents' Night. You must be Jake's father." I nodded, shaking her hand. "That's right. I've been looking forward to meeting you." She smiled warmly, clearly not realizing what was coming. "Jake is a wonderful student, very curious about science and space." "Oh, I know," I said. "In fact, he gets that from me." She looked at me curiously. "Really?" That was my cue. "Yes, you see, I work at NASA." The second the words left my mouth, I saw it. That moment of recognition, the flicker of shock in her eyes as she processed what I just said. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if debating whether to question me. But then, a few other parents turned their heads, interested in the conversation. "Oh," she finally said, forcing a laugh. "Well, that's quite interesting." I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "Yeah, Jake told me about your discussion in class." I continued, keeping my tone light, but firm. "He was really upset when you called him a liar for saying I worked at NASA." The color drained from her face. A few parents nearby turned to listen more closely. She stammered. I don't recall saying that exactly." I wasn't about to let her backpedal. "Oh, but you did," I said. "Jake told me you laughed and dismissed what he said. You told him it was unlikely. So, I figured tonight would be a great opportunity to clarify that he was, in fact, telling the truth." By now, a hush had fallen over the surrounding parents. Ms. Richards glanced around, realizing that she had an audience. Her hands fidgeted, and she let out a nervous chuckle. Well, I must have misunderstood." I pulled out my work badge and set it on the table in front of me. No misunderstanding here, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've been with NASA for years, specializing in aerospace engineering. Jake's always been interested in what I do. So, of course, he'd talk about it at school. The problem is, instead of encouraging his enthusiasm, you humiliated him in front of his classmates. She looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She stammered something, but I wasn't done. I understand that not every kid tells the truth all the time, I continued. But when a child shares something about their life, maybe next time, you should give them the benefit of the doubt instead of dismissing them outright. At this point, other parents were murmuring in agreement. Some gave me approving nods, while others side-eyed Ms. Richards. She was completely flustered, looking around as if searching for a way out. I sincerely apologize, she finally said. I didn't mean to make Jake feel that way. It was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Jake, who had been standing beside me quietly, finally spoke up. So, do you believe me now? She turned to him, her face red with embarrassment. Yes, Jake. I believe you. And I'm very sorry. I patted Jake's shoulder. That's good to hear, I said. Because he deserves to be heard and respected, just like every other kid in this classroom. With that, I picked up my badge, gave Ms. Richards a polite nod, and walked away. Other parents glanced at her before continuing their conversations, but the damage was done. She had learned her lesson, and Jake finally got the validation he deserved. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, something unexpected happened. Jake came home with more to say, and it turns out, the situation was far from over. Update: the day after parents' night, Jake came home from school looking much better than before. There was a confidence in his step, like he finally felt seen. But as soon as he walked through the door, he let out a deep sigh and said, "Dad, you're not gonna believe what happened today." I sat up straight, immediately curious. What happened? Jake plopped onto the couch and looked at me with wide eyes. Ms. Richards was being super nice to me today. Like, really nice. Too nice. That caught my attention. I leaned forward. What do you mean? He shrugged. She kept asking me questions in class, like trying to get me to talk about space stuff. And when I answered, she acted all impressed, even though it was stuff I've said before. And she didn't just do it once, she did it a bunch of times. It was weird. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Was she overcompensating? Trying to smooth things over after what happened at parents' night? It was possible, but I had a feeling there was more to it. Did she say anything else? I asked. Jake nodded. Yeah, after class, she pulled me aside and told me to tell you she's really sorry. She said she didn't mean to embarrass me and that she hopes we can start over. That sounded like the kind of apology you give when you're backed into a corner, not one that comes from genuine regret. But I didn't say that to Jake. Instead, I just nodded and said, well, at least she's trying to fix things. Jake snorted. Yeah, but guess what? Some of the kids in my class are still being mean about it. They keep saying I made up the whole thing and that you just pretended to work at NASA to embarrass Ms. Richards. That made my blood boil all over again. It wasn't enough that my son had been humiliated once. Now he was being mocked by his classmates because of an adult's mistake? And what did you say to them? I asked. Jake smirked. I told them to Google your name. I laughed at that. Good answer. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Ms. Richards might have been trying to fix her mistake, but the damage had already been done. And if some of the kids still didn't believe Jake, I had a feeling this situation was far from resolved. And I was right. Because the next day, things took an unexpected turn. Another update. I was at work when I got an email from the school principal, Mr. Hayes. The subject line alone made my stomach drop. Urgent. Request for a meeting regarding Jake. I read the email carefully. Mr. Hayes wanted to discuss recent events in the classroom and requested that I come in for a meeting as soon as possible. No details. No explanation. Just urgency. That was never a good sign. I immediately called the school and scheduled a meeting for the next morning. When I arrived, I was led into the principal's office, where I found Mr. Hayes sitting across from a nervous-looking Ms. Richards. "Thank you for coming in," Mr. Hayes said as I took a seat. "We wanted to discuss the situation involving your son and the concerns that have been raised." I folded my arms. "What concerns?" Mr. Hayes exchanged a glance with Ms. Richards before turning back to me. "It seems that the discussion from Parents' Night has caused some disruptions in the classroom. Some students have been teasing Jake, and Ms. Richards has reported that there's been an increased level of tension in class." I raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly is that my son's fault?" Ms. Richards quickly shook her head. "It's not. I mean, I'm not saying it is. It's just that some students are questioning things, and it's creating a bit of a divide." I clenched my jaw. "You mean they're questioning whether or not I actually work at NASA?" She hesitated before nodding. "Some parents have expressed concerns. They think the situation has gotten out of hand, and a few of them feel that it was unnecessary to bring it up at Parents' Night in such a public way." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So let me get this straight," I said, leaning forward. "My son was called a liar by his teacher, humiliated in front of his classmates. And then when I proved that he was telling the truth, instead of people accepting that, they're now saying I shouldn't have corrected the record?" Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. "I understand your frustration, but our goal is to ensure that all students feel comfortable in the classroom." I scoffed. "And what about Jake? He wasn't comfortable when his own teacher publicly dismissed him. He wasn't comfortable when his classmates laughed at him. And now he's not comfortable because he's still being targeted. What exactly are you doing to address that?" Ms. Richards looked down, avoiding my gaze. Mr. Hayes sighed. "We're working on reinforcing respectful classroom behavior, but we also want to avoid unnecessary conflict." I narrowed my eyes. "So what's the solution here? Because if you're about to suggest that Jake stop talking about NASA to keep the peace, that's not happening." Mr. Hayes held up his hands. No, that's not what we're suggesting. We just want to ensure that the environment remains positive." I shook my head. "You know how you do that? By making sure teachers don't publicly dismiss their students. By ensuring that kids who tell the truth aren't ridiculed for it. And by addressing the actual problem instead of trying to sweep it under the rug." There was a long silence. Finally, Ms. Richards took a deep breath and spoke. "I really am sorry," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have doubted Jake. I was wrong." It sounded more genuine this time, but I still wasn't sure it was enough. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But words aren't going to fix the fact that my son's reputation was damaged because of this. If you really want to make things right, you'll find a way to set the record straight in front of the whole class." She looked uncomfortable, but she nodded. "I can do that." Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. "I think that would be a good step forward." I nodded, standing up. "Then let me know when it happens." And with that, I walked out. But even as I left the school, I had a feeling that this still wasn't the end of it. Final update. I got an email later that week from Ms. Richards, saying that she had addressed the class and publicly acknowledged that Jake had been telling the truth all along. She apologized to him in front of everyone, explained that she made a mistake, and even took the time to talk about different jobs at NASA to educate the class. Jake came home that day looking more confident than I'd seen him in a long time. "Dad," he said. "She actually admitted she was wrong. In front of everyone." I smiled. "That's great, buddy. How do you feel?" He shrugged. But there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "Better. And guess what? Some of the kids who were teasing me actually said sorry. That was a relief. It didn't erase what had happened, but at least now Jake wasn't carrying the weight of it alone. And then he grinned. "Oh, and you're kind of famous now." I frowned. "What?" Jake pulled out his phone and showed me a video one of the parents had posted from Parents' Night. Apparently, it had gone semi-viral, with people praising the way I had handled the situation. I sighed, shaking my head with a laugh. Well, at least something good came out of it. Jake nodded. "Yeah. And now nobody's ever gonna doubt me again." And honestly, that was the best outcome I could have hoped for.